Welcome everybody to this webinar where we're going to be talking about managing assessment, and we're going to be taking a look at quick eval, grades and rubrics specifically within Amathuba platform. So I'm going to be taking you through these various tools and taking a look at it. And I also have my colleague here with me as well, Chengwen. So Chengwen, would you like to say hi?
Hi everyone, well, welcome and look forward to the session and feel free to ask us questions anyway. Thanks. Back to you, Kat.
Thanks, Chengwen. Yes, and as Chengwen has said, if you have any questions as we're going along, please feel free to raise your hand or to unmute your mic or enter them into the text chat and we'll pick them up as we go along. Just to let you know that the slides that we will share with you after this event, they are constantly being updated as things are being refined and changed within the platform. So they are quite dynamic. So if you come back to the slides later on for reference purposes and you find something has changed, it just means we're keeping them updated so that they are in sync with the functionality that is available within the Amathuba platform. And in this webinar today, what we're going to be covering, we've already mentioned the three tools we're going to be specifically looking at, which is quick eval, rubrics, and grades. But we're also going to be looking at within rubrics how to create a new rubric and attach a rubric, and also using the rubric to do some marking. Then within grades, which is essentially the grade book within Amathuba, we're going to be looking at the grade setup wizard, how to create grade schemes, how to manage your grades, and also enter grades. So the first tool that we're going to take a look at is the quick eval tool. So just to note that quick eval is basically a single location. It's like a hub, if you want to think of it like that, where you can view all of the student submissions that are awaiting evaluation. So in other words, these are elements that are gradable submissions. So this could be something which has been a submission made to assignments or quizzes or even discussions if you've elected to make your discussions gradable. And these submissions will be displayed in a sortable list, and you can select to actually just click on the username and jump straight in to actually grade that particular item. So you can sort and filter and search through the list of submissions to prioritize your evaluation work. So this is a very familiar landing page to all of you by now, I'm sure. It is the initial login screen to Amathuba. And just to remind you that the link where you will find this is at amathuba.uct.ac.za. And to log in, you would click on the blue UCT login button and use your regular UCT network credentials, username and password to access and be able to get into the Amathuba platform. So once you are logged in, you will see that this is the landing page or the institutional home page. And right there on the navigation bar, you will see a link to quick eval. Also on this page, not shown in this screenshot, but there is also a card which you'll find depending on how many courses you have assigned to you. You might have a lot of course cards at the top, but quite far down on the left-hand side, you'll see there's also a link to quick eval. And just to let you know that this link to quick eval is actually what we call the multi-course quick eval card. So in other words, you're going in at the top level. So this is not at the course level, it's at the top level. And multi-course means that it will show you all the submissions across all of your courses so that you can go in and evaluate those. So once you access quick eval, there's also another way to get into it, as we said, at a course level. So if you are in a designated course, you will also find a link to quick eval on the course home page using the card, which is similar to the one you'll find at the top level on the institutional home page. And you'll also be able to access quick eval from the manage course drop-down quick eval link. So the one that we're looking at now, this quick eval, which is located within a course, will show you all the submissions from this particular course. The initial one we showed you on the institutional homepage gives you a quick eval across multiple courses. So if you're going to access it from the course admin link, you will find a link to Quick Eval there under assessment. Remember that this course admin link will give you the link to all of your tools that are available within a course. So it's useful to know that this is here, because if you don't see something on the navigation bar, it's likely that the link is sitting here in the course administration area. So on the Quick Eval page, as we mentioned, you will see a list of all the gradable submissions that are basically awaiting your evaluation. So just to note that you will not see on this list items which are graded or assessed automatically. So say, for example, you have a quiz set up that is full of multiple choice questions and it's all going to be calculated automatically by the system. You will not see that listed here. These are only submissions that require your manual intervention for you to actually go and look at the submission and assign a manual grade. So as we mentioned before, this might be an assignment submission. It could be a quiz submission. If you've maybe asked a long question or a paragraph question in your quiz and you need to manually grade that, then it would be visible here. Or if you have elected to have your discussions gradable, you don't, it's not mandatory, but you can have submissions into discussions made gradable either at the topic level or at the post level. And that's what we covered in our webinar yesterday when we looked at assessing discussions. So you'll have a list here and you'll see that initially you land on the view which shows all of the submissions. You can also switch that to see view by activity. So that's one way of filtering what you are actually seeing on this page. Another way to actually sort the view that you're looking at is in that top bar. You'll see there it says first name, last name, activity name, course, and submission date. Each of those column headers is sortable. So for example, if you wanted to see the most recent submissions, you could click on submission date and that would sort all of your submissions for you, either ascending or descending. The little icons under activity name indicate what kind of submission it is. So if you see the icon that looks like a little speech bubble, that's a discussion submission. If you see the other one that looks like a little piece of paper, that is an assignment submission. And basically what you would do is just click on the name of the user, and that would take you straight through to that particular student or user's submission of that particular item. And then you would go ahead and grade it or evaluate it in the usual way. There's also another way to filter your view that you're looking at. So under the filter drop-down, you can either filter by activity name or use the little search option there, or you can also filter by date. And you can search for specific dates, or you can see everything in the last 24 hours, 48 hours, 7 days, or older than 7 days. So those are other ways you can actually filter what you're seeing here in Quick Eval. Depending on how many submissions you have, those might be very useful options to quickly zoom in on particular submissions that need evaluation. So once you had completed all of your evaluations and there were no more evaluations to complete, you would see this confirmation message saying that you're all caught up and there are no submissions that require your attention at this time. So that would be a way of confirming that everything that required manual evaluation or grading had actually been seen to. So that is a quick overview of the Quick Eval tool, and just to remember that it is available at the course level and also at the multi-course level as you come in on the institutional homepage or landing page. Now we're going to take a look at rubrics. So rubrics might be familiar to you. You may have used them before in Fuller. And rubric tools basically allow you to evaluate an activity or an item based on a set of predefined criteria. So you can create rubrics at the course level, and you can actually reuse them in other courses. And you can do this by using the import, export, copy course component that exists in each of your courses. So sometimes I know people like to create a rubric and then reuse it, or maybe use it as some kind of a template and slightly tweak it for another course. You can indeed do that by copying your rubrics across from one course to another. And then rubrics can be added to assessed course activities. So this would include assignment submissions, discussion activities, and they can also be attached to grade items. So that will be items that you put into the grade book. So to access your rubrics, the way to get to them would be to go to Manage Course, Course Admin in your designated course where you would want to create your rubric. Once you are on the course admin page, you will find the link to rubrics under the assessment category. So there are two types of rubric available. So the first one is called the holistic rubric. So this is really a one-dimensional rubric. So it does have multiple achievement levels. So those are the columns going across, but it only has one single assessment criteria. So the criteria is the row running from left to right, and the achievement levels are the columns running vertically. So you can basically assess a student's overall achievement on an activity or an item. So again, it's based on these predefined achievement levels, but as you can see, it's just kind of a high-level overview, and you would score it using percentages or text. So text or percentage are the only scoring methods you could use on this kind of one-dimensional holistic rubric. Just to note that there is an option on all the rubrics to be able to print rubrics, and this is something that was requested in Vula and wasn't available. So it's good that this print option is available on rubrics within Amathuba. Then the other kind of rubric that you get is probably more often used, is called the analytical rubric. So this one, as you can see, is a lot more detailed. So you can still have your multiple achievement levels, which are your columns running vertically, but in an analytical rubric, you now have multiple assessment criteria. So in other words, multiple rows going across. You can also have different criterion groups, which allow for different number of levels, and we'll show you how to create those in a few minutes. And it basically allows you to assess students' achievement based on multiple different criteria using a single rubrics. And for this, you can score using points, you can use custom points or text. So let's take a look at how we would create a new rubric. Once you've landed on your rubric page, if you've never created any rubrics, it'll look pretty empty and blank as the screenshot does. But to start creating a new rubric, you would just click on the blue button that says New Rubric. So on the new rubric page, it looks like there's quite a lot going on here, but there's certain things that I would like to draw your attention to. So first of all, the important item is the name of this rubric. So as you can see, it has a little asterisk next to it. That means it is mandatory. You do need to give this rubric a name so that it can be saved. Then in the top right-hand corner, you'll see that it actually has the word saving, and rubrics actually save automatically all the time. So that's really good to know that every change that you make, it's automatically capturing it and saving it as you go along. Next to that, just to notice that the status says published. So this is the default status you will see, published. So you can see the other options are archived and draft. So published just means essentially that it's active. So that means that as you're creating this rubric, it is available to be attached to an item. And just to note that published is not the same as the visibility to the student. So The visibility of the rubric to the student is governed by the options, which are found much lower down the page. And just to note that as the status is published by default, when you're starting to create a new rubric, the option of the visibility of the rubric to the student is also set to visible by default. So if you want to have a published rubric that is not yet visible to students, just go down and change that visibility option for the students. So you need to give your rubric a name, as we said. And then the next thing you're going to do is you're going to choose the type of rubric. So as we mentioned, there's two types to choose from. It can either be analytic or holistic. And in this instance, we're going to be choosing the analytic rubric. And then you will choose what kind of scoring you would like to have. So you could have a rubric that has absolutely no score. So in other words, there's no values attached, but you're actually just using it as a feedback mechanism to the students. So you'll be giving them various comments and feedback via text, and there's no score involved. Or you can decide to have points, or you can decide to have custom points. And then the next option along there, which is quite interesting, is you'll see by default, it's given you an initial layout that's going level 4, 3, 2, 1, and the points they've default assigned to it is 4, 3, 2, 1. But if you would like to have the order reversed and have the lowest on the left-hand side and the highest on the right-hand side, you could use that option which says reverse level order, and it would swing everything around the other way. So as we mentioned, you can reverse the level order very easily. You can select scoring points and type of analytic or holistic rubric. You can also change the names of the levels if you wanted to. You can also delete levels if you didn't want so many levels. You can also change the names of different criteria. You can also swap the criteria around. So if you wanted the order to be different of the criteria, you would just drag and drop those rows and they would swap positions fairly easily. So you can see that doing the basic editing of a rubric is fairly simple and quite intuitive from the initial creation page. So we spoke a little bit about criteria and criteria groups. Now, it's important to understand the difference between these. So in this example, you can see here that in the first criteria, there are two levels. So you have just inadequate and meets expectations. But then in the next group down, the next criteria, it actually requires 6 levels, 6 different levels. So if you are needing to have criteria that have different levels, what you will need to do is add a criteria group. So if you click on add a criteria group, it gives you a new distinct row, which is representative of the criteria. And on that new criteria, you can add or take away as many different levels as you need. If you just click the add criterion button, it duplicates the row that you have already had immediately above it. So if you have criteria with multiple different levels, you will need to add criteria groups to get a new distinct row that can have a different number of levels to the criteria that has just preceded it. So to add and delete a criteria is fairly intuitive. It's very easy to do that. As you've seen with swapping around, you would just click on the 3 dots and choose delete to take it away. So it's quite easy to change criteria, move them around, delete them, and add them as required. Right, on the next screen, just another look at the criteria groups here. So remember that adding a criteria group will give you a completely distinct row where you can change different levels and have a different set of levels to the ones you've had before. And you can move them around as well in the same way that you move the different criteria within a single group. You can move whole criteria groups around as well. So it's quite intuitive, just using drag and drop. Now, the additional options that I talked about right at the start, you'll find right down the bottom of the page below where you're actually creating your rubric. And this is where you would set the visibility of the rubric to students. So by default, it'll say that the rubric is visible to students. So if you didn't want it visible to students at this time, you would change that setting to rubric is hidden from students. And then there are also some additional settings to decide on as well. You can also decide if you want the rubric to stay hidden from the students until feedback is published. Then there's also the score visibility. You can decide whether or not to hide the scores from students. And then in the description area, you can add a description for your personal reference that will not be shared with students. So in other words, if you want to add some notes about this particular rubric, which might be handy if you have multiple lecturers all working on the same site and maybe they are contributing or adding to your rubric as well, you could actually leave notes here about the rubric, and they are not visible to the students, only to those people who have edit access to the rubric. So here is a sample rubric, just so that you can see what it looks like once it's actually been created. And here's one that's made use of the criteria groups, because the first criteria only has 2 levels represented, and the second criteria has 6 different levels represented. So you can see that it's on its own distinct line, its own row, but it is presented in a kind of consecutive layout, so it doesn't look too disjointed. So let's take a look at how you would attach your rubric now that you've created it to an activity. So the activity we're going to take a look at now is an assignment. So let's see how you would attach a rubric to an assignment. So let's imagine that you have created your assignment and now you want to use the rubric as a method of evaluation. So when you are in your assignment and you are busy editing the elements of your assignment, on the right-hand side, the evaluation and feedback area, you will expand that. So once you expand the evaluation and feedback area, you will see a button that says Add Rubric. So you would click on Add Rubric, and you have 2 options there. Either to create a brand new rubric from scratch right then and there, or to add an existing one. And seeing as we've just created one, we will opt for adding an existing rubric. So once you click on Add Existing, it'll pop up a window where you're able to see all of the rubrics that you have created. You would just select which rubric you would like to attach by using the check mark next to the relevant rubric, and then click on Add Selected. And once you're done that, you would see that your selected rubric will be added under the rubrics area of the evaluation and feedback. And is it possible to add more than one rubric? Yes, it is. I'm not sure why you would want to do that, but some people have asked about that. So you can add multiple rubrics, but if you are sending these results through to Gradebook, only the scores which come from the first rubric will actually be sent through to the Gradebook. Now let's take a look at how to use a rubric to mark a submission. So using our example of an assignment again, if you were going in and marking an assignment, on your right-hand panel, that is the area where you would normally be providing your feedback and your marks. There is where you would find your rubric that you had attached to the assignment. So there's 2 ways to access this particular rubric. Either you can click on the downward point, the arrow, and you would expand it, and then you would use the rubric inline. So in other words, it would open up within this right-hand panel, or you could use the option which is outlined in green there, which says pop out, which will actually pop the rubric out into a bigger full screen window. So we're first going to see what it looks like when we expand the rubric and it's contained within the right-hand panel. So on the next slide, you'll be able to see what that looks like. So here's an example of an expanded rubric. It expands in the panel, and you can see it's quite a condensed format where you see the different items, the different criteria on the rubric, and you use the sliders just to indicate the marks. So it's quite a condensed view. This might work for some people, depending on how much information you have on your rubric, just using the sliders to apply the marks for the different criteria. And then once you'd made your selection, you would just click on the update button at the bottom. Then if you chose the option to pop out the rubric, it would open in a new window and you would see the more regular expanded view, which looks very much similar to the way you'd actually composed or created your rubric. So you'll see the full layout in the criteria rows and the achievement levels in the columns. And you'd be able to click on the achievement levels and the marks would tally for you in the right-hand column. And that would also update the bottom area where the overall score is also represented. So we're going to take a look at grades now, but before we proceed, I'm just going to check in with everybody if there are any questions so far about rubrics or quick eval. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. Are there any other questions that people would like to raise at this point?
Yes.
Okay, it looks, yes, Irvin?
If you have set criteria for your rubrics and they change your mind and you want to go back and edit it, is there a function for that?
Yes, so it depends when you're doing the editing. So if you are editing prior to having attached it and there having been submissions and you've actually started grading, so in other words, you've already kind of locked and used the rubric, you will not be able to go back and edit it. But if you have not yet used the rubric to actually grade something, then you can actually go back and edit your rubric.
Thank you.
Thanks, Irvin. That's a good question. Right, let's move on now and take a look at grades. So grades are essentially the grade book. It can get slightly confusing when just using the term grades, but that's what Amathuba uses for the gradebook tool is the word grades. And of course, they use the same word to mention all of the marking, scoring, and evaluation as well. So grades are the grade book within Amathuba. So the grades tool, which I'm sure you'll also be fairly familiar with, having used it in Vula as well, provides an overview of all the assessments in a course. And it's a place where you're going to organize, calculate, and distribute marks. It does have a setup wizard where it can help you define basic settings, and it is a 7-step process, and I'll show you those 7 steps in a moment. You can also create categories for different types of graded assessments. For example, if you wanted to create categories for participation or essays or class tests, you can actually create categories, and you can also apply weights to these as well. And a very handy bulk edit function also exists in the grades tool as well, where you can edit a whole lot of items together. So to access grades, grades are, of course, aligned to a particular course. So once you are in Amathuba, you would need to jump into your particular course where you would like to work with that particular grades tool. So from the UCT homepage, you're going to jump into your course using the cards on the front. Or if you don't see your course there, remember you can always use the waffle icon at the top, which lists all of your courses that you are assigned to. So once you are in your particular course, there are, of course, 2 ways to get to your grades tool. You can either find it on the navigation right at the top, or you can go via Manage Course, Course Admin, because remember, Course Admin gives you links to all of the tools within your course, and you will find a link to the grades tool there as well. So we did mention that the grades tool has a 7-step setup wizard. So let's take a look at that right now. So when you are going into your grades tool for the first time, it's obviously going to look really blank because nothing has been defined as yet. So a good way to get started is to use the setup wizard, and you'll find that right at the top on the last tab. So once you start the setup wizard, it is going to take you step by step through a variety of different settings. So the first one it's going to ask you is choose a grading system. So here you have the option of choosing between a weighted system, a points system, or formula. And on the right-hand side, you can find out a little bit more information about each of those options. But as you have probably used grades before in Vula, you probably already have the system that you are most comfortable with and that works for you and for your students. So once you have selected that, you would click the continue button at the bottom of the screen to go on to step 2. And this is where you're going to be asked about the final grade released. So would you like to release a calculated final grade, an adjusted final grade, and when would you like this to be released? Would you like this to be released automatically to the students? Once you've made your selection here, you click on continue to get on to step 3, which is all about the grade calculations. So if you have ungraded items in your grade book, would you like to drop the ungraded items or treat the ungraded items as 0? And auto update is, I always say, is quite a handy one to keep checked, because that is enabling you to automatically keep the final grade updated. So in other words, any kind of change that you make into your grade tool will automatically keep the final grade updated. You would then just click on continue to get to step 4, which is choosing a default grade scheme. Now we're going to tell you a little bit more about grade schemes, but this is where you could choose what kind of grade scheme you'd like to have represented as a default in your grades tool. So you can also create your own grade scheme. So if you don't see something here which is suitable for you, there is a way for you to actually create your own. So once you'd made your selection, you could just click on continue. And this is where you are going to be choosing about managing the view display options. So here it's going to ask you the number of decimal places to display. So if decimal places are important for your scheme that you've chosen, you would select that here and then click continue. And step 6 is all about the student view display options. So what is it that the students will be able to see? You can choose whether it's points, grade scheme systems, or grade scheme colors. You can also choose if they're going to be seeing the decimals, if you've elected to have decimals, number of characters to display for the text items. So in other words, how much information they'll see, and whether or not to display the final grade calculation to the users. And after you'd made your selections, you would click on continue to get to the last step, which is essentially just a summary of everything that you have selected. So you would go through, make sure that that is all fine. And don't worry if you're not quite sure about some of these items you would have selected, because it is editable. You can always come back and change your mind about some of these items. You would just click finish. And that would give you an initial setup for your grades tool. So we mentioned that grade schemes, you can actually create your own grade scheme. So let's take a look at how to do that. So on the grades tool, you'll see the third tab along next to the one we've just used for the setup wizard. You'll see an option there called schemes. So click on schemes. And on the next page, it will ask you to create a new scheme. You may have some schemes already available to you, and you'll see that there's 2 columns there saying default scheme and set as default. So any of the schemes which are here already or that you might create, you can set them as being the default. So at the moment, we're going to set up a new one. So you would click on new scheme. So as you might expect, the name of the new scheme that you're going to create is mandatory. So you have to give it a new name. And you can give it a short name if you want to. It's absolutely not mandatory. So you can leave that completely blank. And this is where you would define what it is that you'd like to have in this new scheme. So here we're creating one which has 3 letters. So you can see we've got the 3 letters A, B, and C. And you can see that in the column there, it says start percentage. So at what percentage would you like A, B, and C to start at? You can also decide to associate it with a color. And this is actually quite nice because it's a very quick visual indicator when you're looking at a lot of grades as to which students are in which category of the grade scheme that you have created. And you can also put the assigned value percentage there as well. So in other words, for example, if they're getting an A, we've chosen a green color, and that's everything from 70 up to 100. And if they're getting a B, it's everything from 40 up to 69, and they're getting an orange color. And if it's C, then it's everything from 0 up to 39, and we have made that a red color. So that is just a basic view of how to create a 3-letter grade scheme, but you can decide any kind of scheme that you would want to. You can see there's a button there that you can add ranges if you want to. And once you decided how many ranges you wanted to add and what you would like to call these, it doesn't have to be ABC. It can be anything that you want, like excellent or moderate or needs attention, anything that you want to. You would just click save and close. And once you've done that, the new scheme that you had created would then be available on the list. So you can now see we have under course schemes, we now have a new scheme that we've just created called 3-letter grade. And if you would want to set this as the default, because you can see at the moment that the one called letter grades is actually in the column saying default. If you wanted to swap this and make your 3-letter grade the default, you would click on that check mark to set 3-letter grade as the default grade. That would then swap the check mark into the default column, and the other one would swap back into the other column. In addition to creating new schemes, you can see there's a couple more actions that you can perform with these schemes, and you can actually copy schemes, and you can also delete schemes as well if they're no longer needed. Now let's take a look at how to manage grades within the actual grades tool itself. So now we're going to look at the grades tool, which is essentially the grade book. So on the second tab along, we now are on the tab called Manage Grades. You will see this is where you can apply the bulk edit option that we talked about right at the start of this webinar. So bulk edit means that you can apply an action to one, or preferably if you're doing bulk edit, many items all at one time. So it is what we call one of the multi-action functions. So that does require you to make a selection first. So in other words, select items or whole categories of items or even all of the items before actually clicking on the bulk edit option. So once you'd selected the items to edit, you would click on bulk edit. On the next slide, you'll be able to see that bulk edit offers you the option to change various things all at one time for the selected items. So you could actually go in and edit a name of a grade item. You could edit the short names if you are using your short names. You could also edit the maximum points that you'd assigned for this grade item. If you are using things like bonus points or points for exceeding, then you would be able to indicate that here. And you could also change the grade scheme. If you had multiple different schemes, you could also change the grade scheme here. And if you'd used categories in your grade book as well, your grades tool, you could change that here. So bulk edit is a really handy way of changing all of these items for many multiple selected items from your grades tool. Once you had made your required edits, you would just click on save. Now, to add a new item into your grades tool, the easiest way to do this is to click on the new button and then just select item. So when you are adding a new item to your grade book or to your grades tool, the first thing it's going to ask you is, what type of item is this? So is it numeric? Is it going to be a pass-fail? Is it going to be something based on a formula? And probably in most cases, people would choose that this item is going to be a numeric value. So you would check that particular one that you would want. And then on the next screen, you'll be able to see the items that you need to enter for this new grade item. So as you can see at the top, there are a number of tabs. So the first tab it opens up on by default is the Properties tab. And as with everything else in Amathuba, you do need to define a name for this new grade item. So name is mandatory and you need to fill that in. And you can add a short name if you want to. It is not mandatory at all. If you're using categories in your grade book, for example, if you've put all of the assignments together and you have an assignment category, or if you have all the essays together and you have an essay category, you can choose a category here from an existing category from the drop-down list. Or if you would like at this stage to create a brand new category, you can also click on New Category and create a category right here. You can also choose the grading, the maximum points, and you can decide whether you want to allow this to have bonus points or exceed. And you can also choose here if you would like to exclude this from the final grade calculation. Then here you'll be able to also select your grade scheme. So remember, we created one called the 3-letter grade and we set it as default. So that means that will pop up here as default, but you can still change it at this point to any of the other schemes that you have available to you. And if you want to attach a rubric to this grade item, you could do that here as well under the add rubric. And remember, as we created our other rubrics with our other in our assignment example, you can add a rubric that you've already created. So in other words, you're going to be attaching an existing, or you can even create one right at this point by clicking on the create rubric in a new window. And then you can set various different display options, which are displaying the class average to the users, which are the students, and displaying the grade distribution. If you would like that to be visible, you would select it here. And you can also choose to manage the view as well for overriding display options for this item. So once you'd selected the applicable elements here for this new grade item, you would click Save and Close. Or you could go on to the next tab, which has certain restrictions. If you would like to put restrictions in place, you would go on to the next tab called Restrictions. So under restrictions, this is where you could set availability dates. You could also elect to hide this from users. And you could also, if you wanted to, add some release conditions. So we're not going to go into too much detail about release conditions, but that is if you wanted to add something to this, you could add it here where you would select a condition type and you would have your drop-down list of available condition types, and you would attach a release condition to this particular grade item. So that's just so that you know what elements are available to you under the restrictions tab when creating a new grade item. And once everything had been selected, you would just save and close. So that is creating a new item manually in the grade book. Another thing that we've talked about is the categories. So if you would like to categorize your items, you could create a new category by clicking on New and then selecting Category. So in this example, you can see the categories are represented by the blue shaded items. So here we have a category called Week 1, and we have one item in there called 1.1 Introduce Yourself. Then we have a second category called Week 2, and we have 2 items in category too. So you can see the categories are just a way of organizing and making your grade book look a little bit more manageable and easy to navigate. So to create a new category, you click on New and Category. And again, you have two tabs here. So it's very similar to the way you've set up the items. You've got the properties tabs that opens by default, and where you're going to give your category a name, an optional short name, and a description. And the description is actually for you, but you can elect for your users or your students to be able to see the description if you think that's needed. So you can check that checkbox to allow students to view the description. And then on the next slide, you can see what you might expect under the restrictions. Again, whether you would like to hide this from the users, have start and end dates for availability, or attach specific release conditions to this particular category. And once you'd set that up, you would just click on Save and Close. So other things you can do to actually manage your grades within the Grades tool, under the More Actions drop down, you can see there's a number of different options you can also do. So the first one we're going to take a look at is Reorder. So to reorder, you are able to actually change the order of the grade items and the categories if you're using those. So important to note, at the top here, you'll see Expand All, Collapse All. So if you have categories, you can expand and collapse the categories. And once the categories are expanded, you'll be able to see the items contained within a category. So week 1 at the moment, you can see is an expanded view because the arrow is downward pointing and you can see the item within it. And week 2 is also expanded. And if you wanted to change the order, you would use the numbers in the sort order column on the extreme right and just change those numbers to reflect the new order that you would want displayed. So if you wanted to swap week 2 to be above week 1, you would change those categories so that week 1 was number 2 and week 2 was number 1. It would swap those around. If you wanted to change the order of the items, you would just change the numbers in the drop-down lists accordingly. And once you'd made your edits as required, you would click on the Save button. The next option you can also do is viewing an event log. Now, this is quite handy, and the event log gives you a list, quite a detailed list. You'll be able to see that on the next screen of all the events. So in other words, those are the actions that you have taken in your grades tool. So it's not what the students have done, it's what you have done. So it shows you when you created a particular item, if you deleted a particular item, it will all be shown here in the event log. So the event log is actions you have taken as a lecturer while creating or composing your grade book. Then the next option we're going to take a look at is make visible and hide from users. Now, these are both actually multi-select options again, where you first need to make a selection before you can actually apply either of these actions. So in other words, if you wanted to hide various different items from the students, you would need to first check the relevant items and then select the option to hide. And similarly for make visible, first select the items and then click on make visible. And the last option we're going to take a look at now is delete. So you can obviously delete items from your grade book if they are no longer needed. So once you click on delete, it is going to take you to a page where you are going to select the items to delete. So you can select one or many as required. Just to note that you can only delete grade items that do not have associations. So the associations are indicated by that little icon. You can see it's got a little question mark after it. That means that that item is actually locked to an activity. For example, if you had created an assignment and in the course of creating that assignment, you had elected to give it marks and send those marks automatically to the grades tool, that means that that grade item, which is now in the grades tool, is locked to that assignment. So you will not be able to delete that grade item at this point from the grades tool, because it's actually been created in the assignment, not in the grades tool. So you'll only be able to delete items which are available. You can see for deletion on the left-hand side there with the check mark. The other ones which will grayed out are all associated with activities. And once you had selected your items, you would then be given the confirmation message to say, do you really want to delete these items? And if you did want to go ahead, you would click on delete. Now, entering grades, you might have some marks coming through automatically from particular activities that you've drawn up. For example, quizzes that might be marked automatically and you've elected to send the marks through to gradebook, but you can also manually enter marks into the gradebook as well. So let's take a look at how to do that. So the first tab is called Enter Grades. And there's various ways to actually get grades into the grades tool. So one of the first ways to do this is to use the import option. So if you're going to import grades into the grades tool, it does give you a little pop-up window, and there is a specific format that you need to use. And there is a downloadable template file available to you in that pop-up window. So as soon as you click on import, you will see that link. You can download that file that says grades sample import, and that will show you the required format that you need to enter your grades in, along with the student names and student IDs, so that when it's imported, it actually aligns and goes into your grade tool seamlessly. So that's the first way to get grades into your grade book. Note that you can also export as well. So if you're going to export your grades, you would use the export option, and then you would choose what it is that you would like to export. So I know this isn't getting marks in, this is getting marks out, but if you can import, you can also export, and you can choose which fields to include in your export. And once you had made your selection, you'd go to the bottom and choose whether to export to CSV or export to Excel. Then the next way to get grades into the grades tool, you will see here that at the top there's a button that says switch to standard view, and there is also another view which is called spreadsheet view. So this button is quite handy because it allows you to toggle between the two views. So at the moment, we are actually looking at spreadsheet view because the button says switch to standard. So in spreadsheet view, as you might expect, it's very similar to a spreadsheet where you actually see the student's name, and you can see the activity in the top of the column there, week 5 assignment, and it gives you the option to literally just type in the marks into those empty fields there. So as you would normally just type into a cell in a spreadsheet, you can type directly into the empty field and assign marks. So this that we're looking at the moment is actually spreadsheet view. At the top there, it says some grade items or categories are not displayed. So that is a way that if you have a lot of items in your grades tool and it's really just unwieldy and it's huge to actually move between all of your activities, you can elect to, just for your view, hide certain columns so that you can focus on particular designated activities. And if you have certain columns hidden in your grades tool, you will see that message reminding you that some grade items or categories are not displayed because they have been hidden by you, just for the purposes of refining the view. So if we click on switch, we go to the standard view. So now we know we're in standard view because the button now says at the top, switch to spreadsheet view. So in the standard view, you'll see something where you will have your names of your students listed. And again, you can see that I've refined the view here because that warning message is there saying some items have been hidden. That's me, I've hidden them so we can focus on one activity, which is week 5 assignment. And you can still enter grades in this view by using the drop-down arrow under the activity at the top of the column and selecting the option to enter grades. On this screen, you can also, from the drop-down arrow next to each of the student's name, you can see there's various different options you can also use, such as previewing or emailing the user or viewing the auditors or doing a bulk edit exceptions. So you can actually do quite a few things from this view as well, but it's just a slightly different view. And here you can also see an example of the grading scheme that we used when we assigned colors. You can see the colors show up at this point. So that's why I said it's actually quite useful using colors, because if you have a lot of students, you can quickly see by virtue of colors which kind of bands the students are falling into. Now, we mentioned that you can hide and show columns. So this is not for the student view. This is for your personal view. If you have too many items in your grades tool and you just want to see certain, you can use the More Actions button and use the Hide Show Columns. And in the window, you would select which of the items or categories you would like to hide or show just by clicking on the relevant checkboxes. So in this way, you can refine your view and concentrate on particular areas of the grades tool and not have to see everything all at once. And remember, as soon as you've used this option to hide and show certain columns or items, you will get that message saying that some grade items and categories are not displayed. So in addition to this webinar, we do offer you a variety of different resources and support. So we do have a quick eval, rubrics and grades quick guides, which are available on the SILT website. We will provide you the links to these as well. And we also have designated pages on the SILT website where you can find additional resources available for staff and for students. If you need to get hold of us, you are welcome to contact the SILT help desk, or if you have any other questions or feedback, you are welcome to email amathuba@uct.ac.za. And you can always find out more information about Amathuba and additional resources, which we are updating all the time. So please check back regularly on the SILT website. You will find the link to the Amathuba resources quite visibly on the homepage of the SILT website. Thank you very much for being here with us today and going through this webinar. And thank you too very much to Chengwen, my colleague from SILT. And if you have any questions, you are welcome to unmute and ask your question now. Right, I'm not seeing any questions at the moment, so thank you very much for joining us today. If you have any additional thoughts afterwards, you're welcome to use those email addresses. We will share the link to the slides and the recording with you, as well as the links to the various resources on the SILT website. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Irvin.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, Anin. Thanks.